Hello, and welcome to the Shades of Chiron podcast. I'm your host, Reverend Hope, and today we're going to talk a little bit about astrology. Specifically, we're going to talk about the asteroid Chiron in the sign of Scorpio. I wanted to do this as a bit of an introduction to why I named the podcast the way I did, and to give a little bit of information and a little bit of background. So, without further ado, if you were born between September 3rd, 1997 and January 6th, 1999, then you were born with the asteroid Chiron in the sign of Scorpio. Chiron moves around the whole zodiac every 50 to 51 years, but it wasn't discovered until 1977. This likely means that the archetype of Chiron was mostly latent and dormant, perhaps not manifesting overtly until the collective zeitgeist was ready. In Barbara Hanklow's book, Chiron and the Rainbow Bridge, she notes that during the 70s, during the discovery of Chiron, there were many events that took place that seemed to correspond to the themes represented by Chiron. More on that either later or at a different time. Just a note. Many astrologers don't give credence to the asteroids or apply them in their work, but I have found that the mythological stories and archetypes represented by the asteroids can really play out in a person's life. In Greek myth, Chiron was a centaur, half man, half horse, born to the Titan Cronus and the Oceanid Philyra. It's Phillyra. I think it's Philyra. He was abandoned by his parents and adopted by Apollo, who raised him to be a teacher, musician, and physician. Chiron is the only centaur in Greek myth to be considered civilized, due to his upbringing by Apollo. I'm skipping ahead and glossing over many details, but Chiron's story ends like this. Being an immortal, he could not die, but his lower horse body was injured by an incurable poison. He traveled to the underworld, where Hades agreed to allow Chiron to exchange his soul and immortality for a cure. Chiron traded fates with Prometheus and was immortalized in the heavens, becoming the constellation of Centaurus. There are other versions and endings to the story, but this is how I remember reading it. The archetype associated with Chiron is the wounded healer. The placement of Chiron in the chart can show you where you may have a particular sensitivity or wound. It also shows how you can heal by using that wound as an inspiration for serving and helping others. Chiron in Scorpio, wounds around sexuality. The wounds of Chiron in Scorpio are as intense as the topics associated with Scorpio. Deep intimacy, death, loss, betrayal, soul-searching, transformation, trust, and sexuality. Chiron moves faster through the sign of Scorpio and the surrounding signs because that's when it's closest to the sun. So, Chiron and Scorpio people have a smaller window. Lucky us. When I say wounds, I mean there is likely extra sensitivity or trauma involving the above topics. Chiron does not automatically signify a trauma. It may be as deep as a sensitivity to something, but it doesn't mean that you will be traumatized. I'll use myself as an example, but know that there is more to Chiron and Scorpio than just my story provides. So for me, that trauma came through the early discovery of pornography. So, people born during the transit of Chiron through Scorpio are at the perfect age to remember when computers became a household staple. I remember hearing the dial-up screeching noises and the AOL, "You've got mail." I also remember when dial-up became obsolete and a newer, faster internet took its place. When the internet sped up, things like YouTube and Facebook were coming online, and you can see pictures and videos pretty much instantaneously for the first time. With dial-up, you had to wait a long time just for a single picture to load. As a kid who had unrestricted access to the computer due to me living alone with my paralyzed mother, I found things on the internet that no kid should ever be exposed to. I somehow found the site RedTube, and that's the first time I ever saw pornography. I was probably around 8 years old or younger. We now know that simply viewing porn can change and rewire the brain, and at the ripe age of 8 years old, my poor little brain was transformed forever by the adults who decided they needed to show the world videos of them having sex. What would have been a natural curiosity about girls was gripped by lust, taken, and distorted into a habit that I would live with for the next 14 years. Maybe porn isn't the thing that wounds everyone, but I have a hard time believing that it is anything but harmful. The second that the sacred act of sex becomes externalized and made public and exploited, it's no longer sacred and no longer about the bond between two people. It invites peering voyeurs into the most intimate part of life. Sacred bond is replaced with pure sexual gratification. Intimacy is made public, and the influence of this desacralization distorts the minds of whoever sees it. It is a plague, an epidemic, a cesspool of bits, juices, and feces. There is no love to be found there. I often wish I was never exposed to porn, much like probably how Chiron felt being exposed to that incurable poison. I know that my life would be drastically different, and I wouldn't be the same person. I wouldn't have the wisdom that these terrible experiences can impart, which is a quintessential Scorpio experience. And I wouldn't have the opportunity to help other people recognize the evil that has become so normalized. This is why I relate so much to the archetype of the wounded healer. The more I think about the prevalence of porn, the sadder I get. It's such an existential, abyssal sadness that only grows deeper the older I get. My Chiron placement is in the 11th house in Scorpio, meaning the area of my life affected by this wound involves my goals, hopes, aspirations, the future, and my connection to broader society. It was broader society's influence that afflicted me to begin with. The house placement of Chiron will show you where the wound is, how it might be afflicted, and how you might heal from it. The sign shows the nature of the wound, and the house shows where it shows up in your life. My wound was afflicted by broader society, and part of the effect of that was a desire to isolate myself from others. It also shows that the opportunity for healing involves addressing society's ailments, the thing that wounded me in the first place, to create a better environment for future generations so they don't become sexualized and exposed to pornography at too early of an age like I was. There were many other factors that helped create my particular circumstances, but the main function of my porn addiction was isolation from others and a disconnection from my goals, dreams, and aspirations. The magic of astrology is illuminated when you track the patterns of the stars. Tracking involves looking back at major points in a planet or asteroid's journey and identifying correspondences between your life events and certain placements. For example, the first time I watched pornography when I was about 8 years old. In February of 2006, I was born in 1997, so 8 years old, Chiron was exactly square, meaning it was making a 90-degree angle to the place where it was at my birth. Squares represent challenges, friction, obstacles, and the motivation needed to overcome the obstacles. Chiron's square coincided with the time that I first discovered pornography and became wounded by it. The next major stage in the cycle will be the opposition, when it is 180 degrees away from its place at the time of my birth. And that happens in July of 2027, when Chiron reaches 4 degrees of Taurus. I have it at 4 degrees Scorpio. Chiron then will go retrograde at exactly 4 degrees, Taurus, which is very significant because it punctuates the aspect between my natal placement and the transiting Chiron, and it will return to 4 degrees again in May of 2028. Chiron will then move forward and then retrograde again at 8 degrees of Taurus in September of 2028, and then move backward to 3 degrees of Taurus. On January 13th, 2029, Chiron will come out of retrograde and then hit the exact 4-degree mark in my chart again on January 28th, 2029. This means that transiting Chiron will oppose my natal Chiron on 3 separate occasions over the course of 2 years. I'm already experiencing Chiron-related themes in my life currently, but these may be points that are emphasized and will likely have to do with themes that came up during my life when it made its first square. Fun fact, Chiron was also discovered at 3 degrees Taurus, meaning that Chiron will complete its first full cycle around the zodiac since its discovery, right on that sensitive point in my chart. Lucky me. I plan on making a book or a pamphlet that breaks down all of the Chiron placements by sign and by house at some point in the future, because I want to have a better understanding of how Chiron acts, and I want to be able to share that with other people. In the books that I have read, and I have not read all of them, but in the ones that I have read, people will talk about Chiron in the houses and in the signs separately, but I want to endeavor to take the 144 different placements and really dive deep into them. So, what do other Chiron and Scorpio examples look like? If you have Chiron and Scorpio in the first house, then you may have pain, sensitivities, or trauma regarding intimacy, sexuality, transformation, loss, or other Scorpio-related themes that affect your physical body, your outward appearance, your self-perception, or your soul's calling. The first house is the sign of your ascendant, which would mean that you have Scorpio as your ascendant in this case. Your soul's calling, for a Scorpio rising, is to find a deeper sense of meaning in life through intimacy, sex, relationships, and difficult transitions that require letting something go. Having Chiron here indicates that you embody the lessons from painful experiences and naturally teach others through example. The first house is all about the physical body and the outer appearance and who you actually are. So these lessons will have a particularly strong impact on your sense of self, your destiny or your fate or your soul, however you want to view that, which is very powerful and intense if you happen to also have Chiron here. I'll go into much more detail in the pamphlet, but the basic equation looks like this. You take the Chiron signification, the wounds and the healing, you combine that with the sign signification and the house signification, and that gets you your basic delineation. There's a lot more I want to share about this topic, but I'm realizing that it would be best if I save it for a more in-depth analysis. At the very least, I've introduced a small shade of Chiron and gave you a basic understanding of its significance in the sign of Scorpio. In the pamphlet or book, I will go over the specific issues in each sign and give in-depth definitions and explanations. For a small example, for Chiron and Scorpio, I will discuss what intimacy means, what transformation means, why Scorpio is connected with themes of intimacy and transformation, and how those wounds could manifest and how healing could manifest. The same thing with the definition of transformation, because that encapsulates a whole range of life experiences. So to close, I'll share a little bit about why I decided to name this podcast Shades of Chiron. This is actually a name I came up with maybe about a year ago. I wanted to create just a a brand or a business called Shades of Chiron, but I realized that it would be much better to just have it as a sub part of me and who I am as Reverend Hope. And I chose it kind of as a mixture of Chiron's themes and also the book series 50 Shades. There's something about the sexual nature, especially of Chiron and Scorpio, that I really wanted to delve deep into and explore, and that's exactly what we're doing on this podcast. So, Shades of Chiron, because we're talking about all the different parts of wounds, of trauma, of healing. Not just related to sexuality, because there's so much more that I want to introduce, especially as we go through Chiron and the other signs. As I write this book or pamphlet, I will happily share a little bit on the podcast of what I'm writing, and to give a little bit of that information out for free, because I think everyone should be empowered with knowledge and to figure out who they are for themselves. So it's not much of a story, I guess, but that's how I came up with it, because I really wanted to start talking about the things that fucking hurt me. And I think that the more that we're able to open up vulnerably and to feel the wounds that have been inflicted, to recognize where our core issues are, such a Scorpio thing too, to recognize the core issues and to shine some light on them. Because Chiron was adopted by the sun god Apollo. So we're shining some light on the deepest core issues that we have, using astrology as a tool to help us recognize where those core issues might be and how we can best address them, and then taking some practical steps to maybe just make this existence a little bit easier, a little bit more worthwhile and meaningful, a little less desperate and depressing and less full of existential dread. So that's going to be it for today. So if you stuck around, I thank you for listening. And again, I'm Reverend Hope, your host, and I look forward to seeing you again. Take care.